You're a failure.
And that's okay. Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Alicia. And we're
failures
too.
We take a walk back through people's failures and relive the mistakes they made so we all can have more clarity in how to be a better human. Our guest today discovered the depth of her failure while literally under fire. In a bunker, specifically. It took a rocket strike while serving abroad in the U.S. Army in Afghanistan for our guest to admit that her marriage was over. Candice Frost is a colonel in the United States Army who now works tirelessly to create opportunities for more women in national security. She's taken steps to encourage more men and women to mentor others and create leadership development programs to meet the needs of the next generation. To get there, though, she had to build and rely on her community to navigate the complicated process of divorce while serving in the military, build a somewhat taboo life as a single mom, and find her purpose to support other women in the armed services. Welcome to the podcast, Colonel Candice Frost.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Oh, all right, so where do we start in this tale?
Let's see. We start way back on a drop zone in the 1990s in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
What's a drop zone? I'm
Oh,
already asking
that's
questions.
right.
Just
There you
about to
go.
ask the same thing.
I just want to say, listeners, there is a fantastic visual that I am blessed to see with Dan and his shirt. He wore a military theme. I'm your military representative here. And I used to, back in the day, jump out of perfectly good airplanes and parachute down into a drop zone, which is an area that you establish. And lots of airborne paratroopers know that term. But I was in an infantry division, back in the day, I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. And that is where I met my then boyfriend, then husband. And we got married at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the 82nd Chapel.
Did you meet him like midair or actually on the ground?
On the ground,
Okay.
actually. Yes. We were both platoon leaders at the time. So we were young second lieutenants and excited to be a part of this historic division and had a lot in common then and there at Fort Bragg.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well-
I can imagine you probably connected initially on a lot of things, including jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Exactly. Yes. And there are the themes that drove us together were just kind of, I think both of us had a true love of service for the country. And we were married and had two beautiful children.
Oh, happy ending.
Yeah. So that's where the story comes in.
Okay.
Because this is a story about failure.
Okay.
And we are going to talk about that. This story went very well, and we did deploy together. We spent time in Bosnia together, Afghanistan together. You know those vacation hotspots for the military,
Great beaches.
especially for the Army.
Right.
Great hotspots. And during that time, we had just both become different people. And layer that on top of, just as anyone knows with young kids, there's a significant amount of stress that's put on your relationship and marriage. And we had started to kind of rip apart quite a bit. And as we talk about failure, it's the discovery of that failure and what you do with it.
Mhm.
So here I am. I am a mom with a couple-month-old kid and a 1.5-year-old. And my husband at the time comes back from Iraq, and he's really battling post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mhm.
Better known in my line of work as PTSD, but to the outside world, he came back and he was he was angry. He had some psychological things to deal with, and I said, okay, let's do this together. We're going to go, and we went to therapy together, and we went to all sorts of different methods and modes of trying to rehabilitate him. And so I was on board. I was the Army hard charger too, and we're going to fix this.
Mhm.
There you go. There's the error. You're
Yeah.
going to fix it. So At the time, I had finished a planning school, and we lived in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which is just about an hour north of Kansas City, Missouri. And I was on slate to deploy again to Afghanistan, and he had decided to leave the service. So he had departed the Army, and I was the service member in the Army, and I was going to go deploy. So I think that had an impact on any male service member's ego, to have your wife go overseas and you're at home with the kids. That played into it.
So sorry to interrupt, but was
Yes,
that
Dan.
something that you two had kind of discussed, or was this kind of subtext?
We had discussed it, but it was one of those almost things that I knew I had to do, because I had not deployed in so many years and had 2 children. And it was kind of like my time was up, like anything, right? Every now and again, when it's your time to go do the duty, to get on the roster, to do the duty downrange, you do that. And knowing that, I mean, it was tough. I knew I was going to leave my 3-year-old and 1-year-old, but I set the conditions. And so knowing my husband had some issues and difficulties with some mental health problems, he was set at home with his parents and my kids then. So they had their grandparents. And I thought I had set up this perfect condition, the lightness in the world. It was all going to work out until I go downrange. And that was tough. That was really hard, to leave your kids knowing your husband was really battling something mentally, and every day worrying about them. And it got to the point where I'm downrange, and just the look on my face, the fear in my eyes. People would ask, even when I went back once, and I saw my then husband, and I came back, and normally you come back and you have all these stories to tell. And I was just like, I really miss my kids. And I found myself saying, if I could only bring my kids to Afghanistan, this would be perfect. Now, normal people don't say they want to bring their children to a war zone. Right?
No.
So yeah, like there are indicators in your life, when you say things, you're like, yeah, a sane person doesn't say that. So I was, like many times, there are lots of rockets that come in as the enemy wants to try and strike you with their artillery shells.
Actual rockets, not metaphorical rockets. Okay.
Not metaphor, okay. Not singers that sing about fireworks and all sorts of things. These were real rockets. And so when that happens, you go into it's called a bunker, or you go, you go to like my version of safe space. Everyone has their own version. Mine is where you can't get shelled by artillery. It was very safe.
Sounds like a great safe space.
Quite different than corporate safe space, like a nice little room. Nobody can hear anything.
Right. I could hear everything, but I felt very safe under concrete and sandbags. There you go. So I'm in my super safe space, and I just start playing in my head. I'm at the end of my marriage, and I've got to stop, kind of lying to myself that this is going to work out and I'm going to fix it. And the rockets are just exploding around me. And those are kind of one of those epiphany moments where you're just like, wow, I'm going to make a massive change. And it was like a switch that just flipped. And and this is the part of failure sometimes, because I weighed that decision a lot, but it had been every day, one little thing. And that's where I felt like as if I was on a school bus, and every day you could just take one little piece of tape off the window, every window was covered. But if you took one little piece of tape every day, and then all of a sudden you see where you're going, and you're going off a cliff. So I hit the brakes, and it was like a weight had been lifted. And so I said, okay, I made this decision. I'm going to sleep on it. And the next morning I woke up, and every morning I would run around the airfield. And that was the lightest I had felt in years. I felt like I'd just taken the rucksack off. A weight had been lifted, literally, mentally, physically, emotionally. But I knew in that failure moment, I still had a lot of climbing to do. I still had to climb up that mountain.
I have a couple questions. So how long had it been between the time that you both started going to therapy together and then you had been deployed and then reached this decision? How much time had passed?
That was at least a year, maybe 2 years. So this was, and that's the part, I tell everyone, you should give yourself grace when you go into therapy. Is hard. And it's hard for everyone, especially the person that has to understand, cognitive behavioral therapy, and helping someone out with that they have to make the decision to change a lot of who they are. I mean, they get into habits and especially in our military, you see some deep, dark things and your mind can go to dark places. And those who unfortunately have problems with that, coming back to what is normal, what is real, it's a struggle. And the person has to do the work themselves. And the spouses who are along for the ride, sometimes you're the ones that are in the real, you're in the zone of that, like, spewed either anger or hatred or vitriol. And that's a hard place to be for a long time. And then when I started seeing that towards the kids, that's when I often say when Mama Bear came out and realized, okay, this is for the protection of them as well as it is for me.
So that was the main catalyst, seeing this behavior. And I'll go back. I like your analogy here of you almost being in the war zone yourself as a spouse. When you were at home, you're in this war zone. But so was the catalyst for you to make this decision, seeing how your now ex-husband was acting and his actions and behavior towards your kids? That was the moment?
Yeah, that was a big driver. I think that drove me. And also, so many people, when you're separated from an environment, right? And you're taken out of, hey, I've lived this, I'm in the middle of it, you're grinding, it's becoming normal to you. And then when you're removed and put in another environment, you can be reflective. And there's a great book called Educating the Reflective Practitioner. I'm going to geek out on you for a minute.
Please do. I'm interested.
There you go. By Donald Schoen. And it's an academic book. What the best part of it is, it talks about, the best teachers that exist, the best people in business, they can both be somewhere and then reflect on where they're at. So just like an orchestra conductor, they stand in front. They may be able to play 5 or 6 different instruments, but when they move themselves away from the position of playing into the position of receiving and watching everyone else, it's a totally different experience. And then that makes them a better player because they see, oh, well, maybe I should adjust this. Well, it was the same way for me with my ability to reflect and get out of the environment. I could see from afar, this isn't healthy, this isn't normal, and I really have to make this change. And by letting go of this, what I had gripped onto and tried to make work, I can learn from that and have this second chapter that's going to be even better.
Wow. So that, when you were in that safe space, that is the new context, which is interesting that you had to go to another country, to a really extreme circumstance, to disconnect from this relationship in some sense, and then realize that the relationship was an unhealthy one. Right.
And then it was, the rebuilding afterwards. So when the marriage had failed, and then I said, okay, now is the hard part. And that's when I started to look around and realize it's not just me. There are lots of people in really unhealthy marriages around me. And we had been in the military in that time, we had been deploying for maybe 10, 15 years, over and over and over. And there were so many people around me that just, as soon as I said it, I verbalized it, they said, oh, I'm feeling the same way, or I know the same thing had happened. And that's where it almost became this community of support that, hey, I've experienced it, let me help you go through this. Because just saying it is the start. Now you're at the start line.
Yeah.
Now you have to run through and get to the other side.
Do you remember when you first kind of took these internal thoughts, this choice, and verbalized it to someone? Do you remember that?
Yes, the first people I called were my parents, and my parents, asked me, "Is this what you want?" And I said yes, and they literally breathed a sigh of relief because they had come to visit us. This is their daughter, and when we were in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, they visited one time, and that's when my now ex-husband and I were living together, and they had seen him just incredibly angry, and the things that he had said were so disparaging. And they said they left the house and looked at each other, got in the car, and drove back towards, at the time they lived in Iowa, and they didn't speak for 2.5 hours. They just couldn't talk. And they said the look on my face with the 2 kids in my arms and just it was lifeless. And they said, we can't believe our daughter is living like this. And they just couldn't talk to each other even. So I think they had known that this was breaking apart, this was failing, but they knew how hard I was trying to keep it together. And so by expressing that to me, I think they would have felt like they added another burden onto my shoulders.
And that's a realization only you can have for yourself. No one else can have for you.
Right. And, after I had said it as well, so many of my friends were like, oh, yeah, I knew. And it was like, maybe you could have just indicated that. So that's where I tell good friends now, is sometimes, you can have subtle indicators. And if that advice is welcome, okay. But if not, then move along. But it's never a hard thing just to say, hey, I'm seeing something. Maybe you're not. I would like to offer, I am a friend. And that's what friends do. They talk to each other about those things.
May I make an observation? That's what I like to tell people. I have an observation. Yeah. May I share it with you? And if the answer is no, I'll be like, all right, let me know when you're ready.
That's right. Move along. Here's the tip. Just the tip. Happy marriages don't do what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion.
Hot
tips.
Yeah,
okay.
Hot tip. I like it. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that to work. Got some hot tips for you.
So when you first started reaching out, you reached out to your family, which makes sense. But then you started reaching out to other people that you were deployed with, or did you have a women's network, or how do you talk about this?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's not normal to talk about.
Yeah, so I had not only peers that I work with. This is a great story. I had a boss, and he wasn't my boss at the time, but we were deployed together. Amazing. He's still a mentor to this day. And Colonel Guthrie, great guy. He told me, here I am. I'm working away. And he said, grab your headgear, Ranger. Now, at the time, this was, women were not Rangers at the time, but we had been in the infantry unit so many times together. He kind of treated me like a compatriot. So that was a very kind gesture that he did. And almost like a kudos brotherhood slogan of saying, I empathize with you, come walk with me. And so when he told me that, I left the area I was in and we kind of took a walk around, and he knew my now ex-husband and had said, hey, let's talk about this. And throughout that, he not only did he listen, but he was one of the first people that said, I can see why you came to that conclusion. Now, so many other people that knew the both of us together, they felt sad. Oh, it's a dual military and the world is so hard and woe is you. But he was one of the people that actually listened and said, I'm glad you've thought that through. I think this is the right decision for you. And your family is always going to back you up. But when one of your old bosses, who knows both of you, will say something like that, it was like a breath of fresh air. Like, okay, I can do this. I can get through this. And again, the military, as much as the changes that it's going through, there's still there's an underlying theme of the very 1950s, 1960s kind of stay married, very, very insular culture that we deal with. And so knowing this, I knew I was also going to step out on a limb. with respect to my career. But he was just points like that. He was very assured that I could do this because I knew I would be a single mom in the military and how difficult that would be.
What did his validation do for you? What did that maybe ignite in you, or what happened next after you got that kind of confirmation from him?
Yeah, I think what that meant was that, I could start to tell my bosses. So I had just kept it, my family. I had told my now ex-husband. I had just told a very small number of people. And then when I started to tell people that I admired, mentors, seniors, okay, I was like, I know I'm going to this next location. I need to tell my next boss I'm going to come there and go through this, kind of rough situation. Divorces don't happen overnight, and they take a little while, especially with kids. And it was just like, okay, this is how you talk to people. And most were very accepting. Some weren't. Some were a little hesitant to say, do you really think you could do this? Can you stay in the military and be a single mom? Lo and behold, you can. You can. Oh, yes. It was. So, some people were very judgy.
I'm curious, was your interest to share this with people, especially, your managers and the people that oversaw you, was it because there were like job impact, like was it going to impact your deployment? Do they have to make accommodations, or is it just kind of like a, hey, FYI, I'm going through a tough time?
So everywhere in the Army, like, you have a form for everything. You have a form like, what color are your eyes? What teeth are you missing? Have you gotten your shots? They're really big on shots. So it turned out to be good right now. I am two in. So go Pfizer, or Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. Just do it. There you go. My public service announcement in your podcast. So they track everything in the Army, because you're a person that works for them, and they want to know everything about you. So when you get a divorce, it says spouse, or we call it dependents. We still use that term. And so there would be a reduction of not only my dependents, but who is on my medical, who is, who I claim. Right. So all of these things that somebody would see it. And I'm sure I didn't want to have people ask me questions. So I would that's why I volunteered a lot of information.
Got it.
Yeah. And I imagine the stress, I can only imagine. I mean, I feel like a breakup in itself, I've been through a breakup before, and that's hard. And you carry your whole self to the workplace. And if you're deployed and you're living and working in this whole environment, then going through a divorce, it's going to show up in some capacity. So probably better to get in front of that, I imagine.
That's right. And then you can also, I think what it created in me. So I redeployed from Afghanistan and went through the divorce process in Arizona. And I had a phenomenal boss there who understood, because there were times when our days started really early. Like, we would start physical training at 6 a.m. And I had to have a babysitter or someone like watch the kids, because at the time then my kids were 2 and 4. So I would have to have, like, let's say my daycare provider got sick, or at one point I had a babysitter quit because my kids were big. I had big babies. So that person was very empathetic and understood I was going through the transition with daycare providers, and kind of allowed me to have, like, if I had a sick kid, I would have to bring one in with work. I was lucky to have an office, so I could let my kid lay on the couch and I could continue to work all day. We didn't really telework back then. Now it would be a blessing. But those bosses who are empathetic, I'll tell you, that's a huge reason why I was able, and I allowed myself the grace to be able to continue on this great, amazing career that I have in the Army. It's because I had bosses that supported, hey, we know she's going through a super big transition period, and how I could continue to make it work.
Got it.
And it did.
Yeah, I mean, you're still alive. Your kids are still.
Yes.
I heard that your son got new teeth, or got braces
That's right.
off.
He got his braces off.
I do. I have a son with no braces and a daughter who is a phenomenal debater. So she did very well at regional debates. Yes. No, it's good.
That's
I'm
amazing.
a proud mom. I'm still super, mama bear. Very excited.
I don't think that ever leaves you.
It never does. No matter how big they get. Everyone's taller than me in my family now.
Really?
Can't pick them up. Can't put them in my arms anymore. One in each, but no, it's and that's where I say, learning from failure, your podcast, there are so many lessons that I took away from this. And that's what I would love to kind of share with your audience.
Let's do it.
Are the great things that you actually learn from failure.
Mm-hmm.
And God, it makes you a better person. It made me a better leader. It made me more empathetic. My failure and the change made me realize to give myself a bit of grace and some space and to realize, hey, what do I like? Like, who am I? I think it was very reflective in the fact that I had to just determine what I liked, what did I enjoy, and then how I could best parent these two little lives that I was in charge of. And it was phenomenal. I mean, everything from dance parties to reading books to going to the zoo everywhere we lived. Like the zoo was the first place we'd go, right? It was great. It was raising two little people and then watching them become who they are. That's the other thing, their own personalities. And seeing this, I really was given a gift to be able to laser focus in on what was really, really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how much just, goes away, all the extras in life, the signal and the noise, and you can go straight to the signal when you know what's important. And so I set my priorities, and throughout my entire career, I've really been honest with even dating in later after that was a challenge, but it ends up being a great story because I found a forever husband, and we are very happily married. We married on the edge of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. It was perfect. So
you're killing me.
That's
I know.
amazing.
So
that gives me the chills.
There are so many good things to having gone through a failure, but coming out on the other end and saying, I'm a better officer in the Army. I am a better leader in my job, but I'm a heck of a better mother and wife this time around, knowing what my priorities are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, part of the reason it sounds like you had the failure and then you moved through the failure was the opportunity to reflect back and find that signal getting written, once the noise had filtered away. Have you found other opportunities either in your life or other situations or even just habits to make that a more regular occurrence and you don't have to find a bunker to find your next realization?
That's right. I think the biggest thing is just being honest with yourself. What are your priorities? And especially we'll cloak priorities like this is what this person says I should really value. And so many people in life, like the world is telling you should value money or you should value fame or no, to me, what I valued most, I really valued having purpose and having family. So I would ask myself, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What can I do to make wherever I'm at better? And that's just been a part of my life now. I've sought out opportunities to make whatever situation I'm in, to move it forward, to make it better. And then the other thing is that family part is super important. Like there will be no consideration I make in life that doesn't work to keep the unit together. And I have been very successful with that. I've made some really tough choices with respect to my career, but it's all worked out wonderfully because I knew my priorities.
And it sounds like Go for it, Alicia.
Sorry, I was going to ask you about your values. So it sounds like through this failure, you got clear on your priorities. You already knew your values. Do you feel like you did know your values and really clear on them before this, or did this failure kind of help illuminate those as well?
Alicia, great point and great question. And I would say it's like when you have in the olden days when you would take a picture and you'd have to adjust the lens.
Mm-hmm.
And my picture wasn't very sharp. I knew holistically what I thought was important in life. But going through that failure, I had to laser focus in and really adjust the aperture on where, close it quite a bit and just let the light in on where those things were. What did I really, really value? And what would get me to that point to make it through? I mean, there were days where it was like, I'm just going to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and pass out asleep. Like, I am so tired and so hungry. I can't believe I'm doing this. This is hard. So hat tip to the single moms and single dads out there. That is rough. It is. And I can only imagine. I say, if I were in that position during the pandemic, I don't know if I could do it. But I had a community around me. And that's the thing I had also learned. I wasn't very good about asking for help. We're Americans. We raise ourselves up by the bootstraps. No, don't believe it. Don't believe the hype. You need a community any time in life. And the more you surround yourself with like-minded individuals in that community, success begets success begets success. People are willing to help you. Sometimes you just have to ask.
And it sounds like you're also kind of paying that forward now, and you're mentoring other women, especially in the armed forces, and finding some opportunities to start building some more communities. And how's that going?
Right. No, that's a bit of my labor of love. I have really made a strong effort with respect to women in national security, women in the intelligence community, and definitely in the Department of Defense to talk through normalization of the ups and downs in life, and asking for mentorship, because there are so many people that are willing to provide you help. Sometimes you just have to reach out. And then for those of us who have been through the valley, okay, turn around and reach out and pull someone else through that, because heaven forbid, I think the number of people that did extend their hand, like, I'm forever indebted to those people.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and the image that is coming to my mind that I also would like to share with people is that life is not linear. I think that we are, really conditioned to believe that there is a chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and this domino effect that's supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen like that, then we are not doing life right. We're not doing, the shoulds, the things that we should be doing at this point. And it makes us question ourselves, our relationships, our ability. I don't know, but the more that we can help people, it sounds like you're doing a really great job of helping mentor people, about this idea that, there are valleys. Life is linear and not linear. There's squiggly ways to get to the destination. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong or right. It's just your destination. It's just your next stopping point where you set up camp.
Absolutely. And life is all about the transitions. It really is. There are so many points in life where you expect, to go A, B, C, D. And Alicia, that point is sometimes you go A, exclamation point, B, comma, right. I'm going to make a great password out there. So it's totally unpredictable. That's your life.
Yeah.
But you can plan things out and you can look forward. And that's the beauty of design. I'm a huge design theory person. And that's what I use quite a bit in what I do with respect to mentoring people. And I talk about building a bridge. And that's where you can help that person. You provide a blueprint. You can even give them tools, hammers, nails, wood, whatever. They've got to build it. And so that's the thing. Going through that area, I had to build my own bridge to the next side. And the view's good from over here. It's very good. It's a good view.
Do you have any blueprints or tools that you would want to share to any podcast listeners, either around talking about failure or, finding ways to mentor or support each other?
Absolutely. And I'm sure in your show notes, it will be in there. It's my website gives away a free blueprint to better mentoring. And it's www.colonelcandid.com. You can find that there. And that is it's focused on the national security kind of people that want to get into that arena, but it's really useful for any job with respect to either building and finding a mentoring program.
Just one other point I want to just, bring up, because I think it's so important in this world that we're in right now, is the piece about empathy, and how much you brought that word up a bunch from both people who were extending empathy toward you. And then you also mentioned that was a takeaway for yourself as you have become more empathetic as a result of this failure. Is there any like lasting words or messages that you would like to share with people about empathy? And I know that's very broad, but I think it's just so cool. I'm curious to hear if you have anything that comes to mind when you think about this word.
I know Brene Brown does an amazing TED Talk on empathy. So if you haven't seen it, go to
we
Colonel
are
Candid.
all about the Brene Brown here.
Go to Colonel Candid and then go to Brene Brown. So, and yeah, she totally outshines me. Wow. She does a lot on vulnerability, but she does another one on empathy that's really good. And there's a difference between sympathy and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Sympathy is just like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
and people would say that, and they exactly, and they pat, you want a sandwich? And they pat me on the head and be like, and then, but empathy would be that people like, wow, that is going to be tough. Let me help you. Here's a casserole. I'm a Midwesterner, so everything has to do with a casserole, providing you something, food. But with that I realized, hey, during rough times, when people are there for you, they really show their true colors. That means a lot. Mm-hmm. The other part is you are more resilient than you give yourself credit for. Mm-hmm. And so if there weren't tough times in life, you wouldn't know the good from the bad. And you wouldn't know the joys from the sorrows. So it helps you understand when you go through a tough time, in the end, there's going to be something better. And that's the resilience part that I know in our, especially in the Department of Defense, we really push to look at things in a manner in the fact that there are good days and bad days, but there are way more good days than bad. And so how do you get through those tough times? We rely on each other. And you have to build a system to make sure that when you're in the bottom, how do you get yourself back up? And that's resilience. And that's being able to really bounce back and figure out the next time I go, I'm going to try something different. If this day was really rough, okay, what can I do tomorrow to make sure I don't hit that same low? Those are self skills that I learned that I still put into application now.
Yeah, thank you. Great conversation.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, it's been great. I'm very happy to get to talk about failure.
Thanks to No BS Brass Band for the bangin' show music. Check them out at nobsbrass.com. And if you want to join any of our live shows, follow us on Facebook at the 2020 Perspective. That's 20/20 Perspective. As always, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you can get the latest failures delivered right to your ears. And may your failures be spectacular.